Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating piece of security research. If you're using this as a masterclass to level up your engineering skills, you are absolutely in the right place. We're looking at a comprehensive case study published back in May 2026 by researcher Nitheesh Rajendran, who managed to uncover a staggering 20 vulnerabilities in a major South Indian OTT streaming platform. We're going to figure out exactly how these complex architectural failures occurred, how they were chained together, and most importantly, what we can learn from them to secure our own web applications.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the security assessment. Second, the critical DRM bypass. Third, the critical CDN proxy flaw. Fourth, the compound exploit. And finally, remediation.
Before we get into the technical weeds, I want to ground us with this specific number, 9.3. That's the maximum common vulnerability scoring system, or CVSS, score assigned to the flaws we're about to analyze. A 9.3 is critical. It signifies that these vulnerabilities allow for immediate exploitation with a severe business impact. And as you'll see, these weren't highly complex cryptographic breaks. No, they were actually simple, fundamental oversights in access control that just led to catastrophic failures.
What makes this assessment perfectly suited for a learning deep dive is the constraint under which it was performed. This was a complete black box assessment. The researcher had absolutely no server-side access, no internal source code, and exploited no user data. The entire assessment was conducted using purely publicly available tools. We're talking a standard web browser, Chrome DevTools, HAR file network analysis, and basic command line tools like cur. Yet this everyday toolkit was enough to uncover a complete, unauthenticated paywall bypass.
All right, Section 1, the security assessment and reconnaissance. Let's get into it.
Context is absolutely crucial for understanding any system's security posture. This assessment was highly rigorous, following the OWASP Web Security Testing Guide version 4.2. The primary assets making up the streaming platform's architecture included the public-facing web application and its client-side JavaScript. Then there's the API layer, specifically the REST and PIWA APIs. Delivery is handled by the Akamai Content Delivery Network for video on demand. And finally, and honestly most critically for our lesson today, content protection is managed by a Nagravision DRM subsystem, which handles Widevine, PlayReady, and Fairplay licensing.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer breadth of the findings. The researcher found 20 vulnerabilities in total. They range from informational issues, like an AES encryption key accidentally hard-coded into the client-side JavaScript bundle, to medium-severity logic flaws, like a device registration limit bypass. But for our purposes, we're focusing our attention entirely on the two absolute worst offenders on this list, Vuln 11 and Vuln 16. These are the critical flaws that broke the platform wide open.
Moving right along to Section 2, critical flaw, the DRM bypass.
So digital rights management, or DRM, is supposed to be the ultimate fortress for media content. Even if an attacker steals the encrypted video files, DRM ensures those files are useless static without the proper decryption keys. But this brings us to Common Weakness Enumeration 306, missing authentication for a critical function. It's literally like a nightclub bouncer asking what you want to drink, but completely forgetting to check your ID or see if you're even on the guest list. The streaming platform had a Widevine DRM license proxy endpoint, specifically the modular license endpoint used by their progressive web app. This endpoint's entire job is to hand out content decryption keys, but it did so without requiring a session token, without checking for an active subscription, and without any user verification whatsoever.
Let's walk carefully through the intended DRM flow. In steps 1 and 2, the browser loads the manifest, and the content decryption module generates a Widevine challenge. Step 3 is where the catastrophic failure occurred. The browser sends the challenge to the license proxy endpoint. The vulnerability here is that this step had absolutely no authentication gate. The proxy just blindly accepted challenges from anyone on the internet and dutifully forwarded them to the Nagravision DRM server in step 4, which then blindly issued valid binary Widevine decryption keys.
To really put this into perspective, let's contrast the intended security design with the actual reality. The intended flow for the main web player required a valid JSON web token, a JWT, that proved the user had an active, paid subscription before giving them a key. The actual flow, via the exposed PWA endpoint, required zero authentication. All you needed to do was send a syntactically valid HTTP post request with a content ID, and the server would just hand you the keys to the kingdom. If your key endpoint has no access control, your DRM provides literally zero protection.
Okay, Section 3, Critical Flaw, the CDN proxy.
While DRM protects the content keys, the CDN protects the actual encrypted video files and the bandwidth used to serve them. But here we run into CWE 284, improper access control. The platform inadvertently turned its own backend into a shared gateway for the public. This represents Vuln 16, the highest-rated flaw in the report at a 9.3 CVSS. The platform had API endpoints used for streaming and downloading. When a user interacted with these endpoints, the server needed to fetch data from the CDN. The fatal mistake was that the stream proxy attached the server's own premium paid subscription credentials to every outgoing CDN request, regardless of whether the user making the request was logged in or not.
And looking at the proxy code brilliantly illustrates the exact engineering mistake. Notice the server cookie variable. The proxy pulls the server's own subscription credentials via getServerCredentials and then attaches that cookie to the headers of the outgoing fetch request. The server effectively subsidized the entire internet. Any unauthenticated user who hit this proxy endpoint was automatically elevated to a premium subscriber because the server was eagerly volunteering its own administrative session cookie to authorize the CDN request.
To make matters even worse, we have to talk about how the Akamai CDN authorized these requests. Akamai uses two tokens. The HDNIA token is tied to specific content and is short-lived, but the HDNT token is long-lived. It's valid for 24 hours, and crucially, it uses a wildcard scope noted as ACL =/. This means a single HDNT token grants access to all content on the entire CDN. And the truly surprising part? Neither of these tokens actually checks if the user has a valid subscription. The CDN access was entirely decoupled from subscription enforcement.
Which brings us to Section 4, the compound exploit.
You know, in cybersecurity, vulnerabilities rarely exist in a vacuum. A medium-severity flaw combined with a misconfiguration can become a critical exploit. Here is how these isolated flaws combine into a devastating step-by-step bypass. Step 1. An attacker captures the unique, permanent UUIDs for the video content from the CDN paths. Step 2. Because the server is leaking its own session via the proxy, the attacker can extract that wildcard HDNTL token, granting them 24 hours of unrestricted CDN access to download the encrypted video segments. Step 3. The attacker takes those encrypted segments, generates a standard browser widevine challenge, and sends it to that completely unauthenticated DRM endpoint we discussed earlier. The endpoint hands over the decryption keys. The result? The attacker downloads and decrypts premium content entirely for free.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 5, Remediation and Security Fixes.
Finding the vulnerabilities is only half the job, right? Let's move to how this builds into an actionable engineering solution, because fixing them at the architectural level is where the real masterclass happens. And surprisingly, these 9.0 plus CVSS vulnerabilities don't require rewriting the entire application. The required fixes are remarkably straightforward. For the DRM flaw, the engineering team must require a valid bearer token or session cookie on that PWA license endpoint. Before issuing any key, the backend must actively validate that the user actually has an active subscription. For the CDN proxy flaw, the fix is to add browser session verification. The proxy must pass along the browser user's session credentials to the CDN, never a shared server credential. According to the researcher, implementing these strict validation gates is an estimated 1 to 2 hours of engineering effort. 2 hours to stop a complete platform compromise.
So the crucial point to take away from this explainer isn't just about OTT streaming. It's really about API design. Microservices and proxy endpoints often assume that because they're internal or because they're serving an app, they don't need strict access controls. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to apply to your own daily work. Are your organization's internal APIs inadvertently proxying premium, authenticated access without independently validating the end-user session? Take a close look at your proxy headers today. You might be very surprised by what you find.